We have 5 teachers, like I had mentioned, who've joined us today to talk about what's happening in their classrooms. And these teachers, to me, are heroes, right? Because these are the teachers who, despite what their administrations are saying and what the other teachers around them are doing, are pushing the envelope with technology and what they're doing in the classroom. So we have 5 with us today. James is going to be kicking us off. He teaches history. And then Lamar teaches math. Will teaches science. Rich and Cami teach math as well. And then Esther, who we already saw in video, will be wrapping us up. In all of these sessions, we'll have opportunities to have discussions within your table after each of the presentations as well. So I just want to first introduce James. James comes to us most recently. He was a teacher at KIPP LA. I had the opportunity to watch James in action at his school, and the thing that I noticed right away in his classroom is James never sits still. So like we were trying to videotape parts of his classroom and he kept moving around, and it was very difficult, but it was very fun to watch. He's now starting his year at San Francisco KIPP Bay, and so welcome to James. I just want to have one other note, which is all these teachers who have joined us, they're starting school this week and next week. So thank you so much for taking time out and coming to us.
But let's go ahead and get started. My name is James, and I teach at a KIPP school here now in San Francisco, and I'm really excited. And what I did was I was really frustrated when I was in school, and I hated my experience in school, and I decided to take it upon myself to change that. I wanted to make learning fun for my students like it wasn't for me. So I decided last year to take my class and just put it on the cloud. Tear down the walls of my classroom and just make it available from anywhere. And so here's a little bit of that, and I wanted to share some of the cool things that we did. So why the web? And by 4 big findings I found by taking my classroom onto the web and using technology is it increased student accountability. I was able to do a lot more project-based learning without taking all the time of getting all the materials to actually do projects. It fostered student collaboration, and I was able to get at some of those higher order thinking tasks that is typically harder if you're a teacher. So let's talk about student accountability. This is my class website, and so every day the students come in and they take their Chromebook, they go sit down at their table, they open it up, and they go to this website. It's bookmarked right there. They go to today's history lesson, and each of my lessons appears on a blog in the form of a blog post so that it's available and accessible anywhere, anytime, and you can go back to it whenever you want. I give the students, because they're 12 years old and 13 years old, 5 tasks each day. That could range from anything from turning in some type of document to creating this entire project. So I use Google Forms to collect all student work so that I'm no longer collecting papers. I really want to go paperless, and I hate having stacks of papers because I would lose it and I wouldn't go through all of this stuff and I'd feel terrible about it. Now that it's paperless, I have it forever, and even if they turn it in May, I can go back and give them feedback whenever I want. So this is what my homework responses look like, and I pulled this up last night, and this is homework from back in May. And I have it forever. I'm no longer teaching in LA, but I can go back and see what my students were thinking last year during this same exact time. Where if it was on paper, the best case scenario is if I scanned it into PDF and had it, but then it's not indexed if I don't have the PDF configured right. But here it's right here. So when my students would submit their homework, I then would take all those responses and put it into a Wordle. They're 12, they're 13, and to go over the homework, just reading people's responses isn't enough. It's hard to stay in one spot here. So I put it into Wordle, and here's the question on this homework was, what role did Florence play in the Renaissance? And you can see that the words just pop out, and you can understand that this is what the homework is about, and my students got it. Florence was the word that appeared most, so they're using the sentences that start with the stem: Renaissance, people, art, goods, city, family, culture, rich. And from right there, I knew that they got it. And we use that as a launching point for the rest of the class as a conversation. I only have 15 minutes, so I got to go quick. The other thing that I found that it did was do so many different types of projects. And so I really exploring the power of video and actually creating video. And we have to get these kids ready for state tests, sadly, in California. And so I was frustrated with the measuring up books and all the different test prep materials. So I wanted to create a more engaging experience. So I wanted to show you this example. Now let's do some test review where we look at the authority within the Catholic Church. Which of the following members of the Catholic Church have the most authority? Would it be A, the priest, B, the cardinal? And I, on top of it, put annotations so I can click and it takes me to another video and they can correct them or help them with their misunderstandings. That's incorrect. Each priest has an individual church, and there are thousands and thousands of priests in the world. Let's try again. Which of the That's that was incorrect, and I'm going through. That's correct. The cardinal is second only to the pope. Cardinals are the only people that can elect a new pope when one dies. Cardinals also attend important meetings when official business of the church needs to be discussed or. That's the problem with presenting in front of experts. I'm still learning the history.
Not just in front of Catholics. I'd make the case you were right.
Yes, listen, let's have a vote. I want you guys to open up your computers, go to this survey that I did, and we can have a discussion on that. So my favorite tool this past year, was Google Moderator, and it would facilitate a lot of the discussions. And I want to go into some higher level examples later, but I wanted to start with the basics. So the second step on each lesson would be some type of discussion. They would go in and they would submit their answer to a question or some type of opinion. And so the question today was, some people believe that the world will end in 2012 because we're studying the Mayan calendar. Is this a reasonable idea based on what you read last night or not? And so they would go in and they would submit their ideas. And what you can see here is they can then vote on each other's responses. So the most popular ideas would rise to the top. And if we go back to the question, you see that 56 of my students submitted responses, and there was 826 votes. Having your students raise your hands 826 times to share out their answer and say whether or not they agree or disagree is just impossible. But each of those votes represents an instance where the students were going in, thinking and making a decision. All of this is happening in a silent classroom before I even get started with my lesson. And that was really exciting for me. Now let's talk about some of the cool projects that we got to do. So we were studying Japanese geography art. And I really wanted to bring it alive, but I didn't want to have to go to the store, buy all of the paper, bring in all of the markers or the paints and whatnot. And I wanted to do it easy. And because I was using a Chromebook, I found some little application in the store, put it on each of the computers. The students did it themselves. And they were able to create these representations of Japanese geography art within minutes so that we could later go into the more important, higher level talking about why does it represent Japanese geography art. Going into some of the application, the thinking, rather than just spending all day with paints and doing the project. The project is fun, the students are engaged by it, but really we're trying to get at that thinking and reasoning behind why we do things like this. I also like my students to do some of the teaching and do some of the creating. So a project we did in May was each of the students had to create a video explaining one of the topics we had learned earlier in the year. So let's take a look at Chris's.
And now to look at feudalism in Europe. What is feudalism, you may ask, and so I answer. Feudalism in Europe took place in the Middle Ages with royal.
And you can hear in the background that my class is still going on. They each had their computers, and they were just doing this, creating on their own, and everybody in the classroom was able to do something different, create something, and then by posting it on their student portfolios, which was on their blog, they each had a blog, we could go in and learn from each other at their own pace whenever they wanted to, and we weren't confined to them, even if I created a video, consuming my content, because sometimes I'm inaccurate. The final project, or one of the final projects I want to show you, is them seeing and creating the physical spaces that we study, because we study medieval societies, and I don't think they get a true understanding just by reading about cities, reading about civilizations. They need to actually go into some of that thinking and doing some of the thought processes that the people way back then had to do. So each of my students had to go through the process of building Tenochtitlan, going through, finding the island, creating the island in the drawing program, building the causeways, building the chiampas all over the different city, and they were able to create it at 12, 13 years old, doing some of the thinking that was going on back when they were actually doing it in Aztec culture. And because it was done not on paper, done through the power of the web, they were able to do it quickly so that I didn't waste a whole week of them creating these gigantic, diagrams of the different cities. They did it in a day, and we get to some of the processing, the writing about what we're doing. One of my other favorite tools is Padlet. I'm a big visual guy, and so when we're studying a topic, it's really easy for my students to create mind maps of what they are doing. So for here, for example, I think it's Renaissance, I can't really see, and then they'd break off into different chains and talk about the different parts that go into the Renaissance. With Padlet, you could do videos, you could do pictures, and it was able for them to see visually how this all fit together. Because when we're talking about the Renaissance, there's so many different facets. And unless my students can actually put it together and see it visually, they're not going to get it. The textbook doesn't meet their learning needs. So then the next part I want to talk about is my students actually getting, I miss my kids, getting to collaborate. When we're studying civilizations, they're so big that unless you're doing collaboration, you're really not going to be able to learn about the different parts of a society. So we'd use things like presentation, where they would go in and each take different elements of a culture, for example, samurai culture. So one of my students would do the Bushido code piece. Another student would talk about how it fit in to feudal Europe and how each samurai had to serve a daimyo. And each of them then would contribute to one greater presentation, but because it was in the cloud, it was happening in real time. They could be sitting in different classrooms, working at the same time. I was just up in Seattle for the YouTube teacher studio, and I met this teacher who teaches in Prague. We actually went to the same university, and they have this castle there that the castle was donated to the school, and they have all these artifacts that they don't know anything about. And so what we're going to do is link up this year, my students in inner city San Francisco, his students in Prague, and work together to kind of create these types of projects, where it's not just like writing a letter or getting in a little video conference, it's them actually working and thinking together. And I'm really excited for that. The other thing is when we're studying Renaissance art, there's so much art out there that me putting a picture up in the classroom didn't do it justice, didn't give them the opportunity to really understand what this art is. So each of my students curated their own Renaissance art gallery. And what they did is they posted it to their blog. Some used presentations, some used this great program called Capsules. And then they visited each other's art galleries virtually and then left a comment in the blog. So I put on some, classical music, and we just spent the day going and visiting each other's art galleries. Sometimes they would put some picture that wasn't medieval or Renaissance art, and they say, no, this doesn't have lifelike figures, it's two-dimensional, so I know this isn't there, you need to take it out of your art gallery. And it could just happen in real life, or real time. So here's the capsules. I loaded up one, and it's just so much fun for the students to be able to go through and look at the different pieces. So that's capsules. It's amazing. So let's go back in. All right, and the final piece is higher order thinking. What I'm going to be doing next year, I did a little bit this year, is kind of experimenting with blended learning, bringing in the power of video and harnessing the power of technology, the fact that they can do things at home, kind of the flipped teaching model, though I'm not a big fan of buzzwords, but I think it's really a really powerful tool, is breaking my class into 3 small groups of about 8 to 10 students, and them each working in a different station, where at one station they're consuming the content from me, my direct instruction. At another station, I'm working with the 8 or 10 students to kind of learn about the different stuff. And then the third station, they're applying it. They're breaking out and working into their own groups. And I think it's going to be really powerful because I can look and see the learning needs of those 8 students or even smaller groups, while the others are not wasting their time sitting in the back of the class, waiting for me to help them out. So this would be a typical video that they might be watching and consuming, and this is during that whole YouTube piece of the cycle. What we're going to do is take a look at medieval Japan and basically introduce us to the unit. So medieval Japan started in 1185 and lasted until about 1600. The first thing we need to look at is Japanese geography. Japan is an archipelago. Better stop the video before we find some mistakes.
Sorry.
Another thing that I thought was really cool is this is an example of a student's portfolio. But the higher order thinking is they actually started testing each other. Is they'd go into forums and they would create a quiz that would test their teammates on either a video or some type of post that they put up. And to go from that consuming student, just me pouring in knowledge, to actually being the ones that are doing the assessing was really powerful. 3 minutes, okay. And that was really exciting for them to be able to watch them think, test, what makes a good test question? What's going to see if I taught my material to my teammates effectively? And I was really excited about that. The other one is being able to compare over time. So we were studying the different civilizations, and each time we'd learn about a new unit, we would create another slide in a presentation describing that society. And so when I wanted to go in and do some type of discussion around, let's look at the Mayan culture, comparing it to medieval Europe. I didn't have to go back and dig out my own slides. I didn't have to go find their old papers and give it back to them saying, this is what you were thinking when we were talking about medieval Europe. They just had it right there. They could pull it up and they can do the side-by-side comparison. They can go into Poplet and do some type of double bubble where they're comparing the different thinking. And because it was in the web, it was all there, and they have it forever. Like, I can go in there and check it out tonight. And then I have 2 minutes to talk about this really awesome experience that I had at the end of the year. So my students are 12 and 13, 95% African American, and we're talking about the conquests and the Europeans coming over and taking over the land and then going into slavery. And it started out with just basics. Did the Europeans have the right to travel to the Americas and claim the land for themselves? And we had a discussion around that. And then we did a survey. Was the European conquest of the Americas ethical? So we had yes, no, or no, but it was a necessary evil to get to the society that we had today. And 45% of my students thought slavery and the conquest of the takeover of these native cultures was a necessary evil, even though their ancestors had been slaves, to get to the society that we have today. And then I took it a step further and asked them, why do you think 45% of your teammates think that slavery was a necessary evil to get to the society we had today? And their responses just blew me away. These kids are 12 and 13 in South Central LA. And Nidica said, I don't know, maybe they're more focused on materialistic things and not the fact that it was the people that had to suffer. And that just blew me away. To go from just basic, let's talk about who came over and what happened, to why do you think your teammates look at something like that? And that just blew me, and that was my favorite thing. So right on time. Because of the web, my students I was able to hold them accountable for the work that they were doing. They were able to learn through creating, collaborate with their teammates in a real-time environment from anywhere in the world, and to think critically. And that's why technology is so awesome, and I plan on spending the next 40 years of my career making sure my students have a better learning experience. So thank you.